All right, welcome everybody to our Honors Core Unit C lecture today. I'm Dr. Brandon Vick. Thank you for everybody showing up, people not from my unit, for the speaker I have today. And in a minute, I'll introduce the speaker, Hannah Harley. Thank you also for joining us. Um, Before I get started, I wanted to just, for those who aren't familiar with my class, give you a brief intro of what we're doing, how I approach the question of the unit. How do we understand art, and what do we do about it? And me and my students are approaching it from two aspects of economics. I'm an economics professor, and one of course has to be kind of the understanding how do works of art attain these incredible prices. I wanted to look at value of art. How do we value it? And probably the predominant one people think of, maybe in economics and finance, is we value it with a dollar, right? And we see what might be described as bubbles, and art bubbles, and all these prices exploding. And we can learn a lot about the functioning of finance and investments, through the art market. We can apply a lot of that stuff to Bitcoin. We can apply a lot of that stuff to craziness that's going on in financial markets too. So that's one aspect of value, but that's actually not the one I'm most interested in. The aspect of value of art and understanding art and what do we do about it is the role that art plays in human well-being, in economic development, and overall development of communities. And a couple of things kind of brought me to this. I'm my background is a poverty economist and a development economist. And I noticed, before I moved to Indiana, I lived in the Hudson Valley, New York, and I would notice a lot of people from Manhattan would come up to the Hudson Valley, and they would spend their weekends, and they would spend money, and they would buy crafts and art and engage in the local heritage. And when I moved here to Indiana to work at IUP, I noticed that there were similarities, but something wasn't happening. Indiana is similarly close to Pittsburgh. Indiana has similar talent and artistic creativity. And so I was started talking with people about, why can't Indiana be the Hudson Valley of Pittsburgh? And what does it take? It takes an economic ecosystem, bike paths, cool places to eat, breweries, things, cool shops, art, public murals, beautiful things that get people out of the city. And I was talking about this in like 2013, 2014. And you know what? Indiana is well on its way to doing that stuff. And the demand is even more because people want to get out of the city, partially because of COVID and other aspects of life, livelihood are coming up about it. Another reason, and lastly, I'll give it over to Hannah. What else can art do for a community? It's not just economics, it's not just tourism, but it can also be healing. A friend that I worked with on the Appalachian Teaching Project is from Harlan County, Kentucky, and he started a theater program. His name is Robert Geip. He started a theater program that the community members of the community used for personal and community recovery from the opioid addiction that was hurting them, devastating them. And they created theater productions and monologues and poetry and radio shows, all dealing with their process of recovery and dealing with loss. And so not only is art play this economic role, but it plays these other roles in well-being. And having a healthy community means you have a healthy economic system. So that's what we're talking about today. And I'm very pleased, and I'm so glad everybody's showing up for our speaker today, Hannah Harley. I think Hannah has been a driving force around some of those things that we've gotten going on since I've been here since 2013. Hannah is a photographer and an artist. She is director of the Spruce Art Residency. She's adjunct professor at Point Park University. She has lots of beautiful art. We'll show some of her website so y'all can check that out. Hannah, I'm going to turn it over to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of your journey into art and into our little art world here in Indiana?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that introduction and for introducing the class too. My name is Hannah Harley. I grew up in Indiana. I was went to IHS, that sort of thing, and went to undergraduate at Point Park University and grad school at Parsons in New York. Both I studied photography and related media, and now I'm currently full-time at Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art as their site supervisor, where I curate exhibitions, I host events, and I work on their education programming. But I mostly get to kind of have as a hobby the Spruce Art Residency, which brings in artists to Indiana County to live and work on a temporary basis. So it's kind of like anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 months that people will come and live in, kind of student housing that isn't being used and have studios and exhibitions and artist time. And much like a writer would go to the cabin in the woods or on the lake, artists are coming here and finding great creative joy in Indiana County, and that's been something that's been really important to me as we go along with this program. And we've had artists for the last year and a half. We've hosted about 35 artists in that year and a half, when one of those years being 2020. So it's been really fun, and most of them go to studio, create work, and take it away with them. But in October, we hosted artists who made work on our walls. And you might have seen some of those murals along in downtown Indiana that you probably would have seen on any of your kind of walks or drive arounds. But we did 14 murals in 14 days. That program also was a creative sustainable project, meaning that any carbon created in that project was offset by the trees that they planted while they were here. So they planted 100 trees and used air purifying paint. So there's a lot that goes in, and there's a lot of like layers to each project. And what I think you'll find in community art partnerships is there's 17 organizations that work together on something, and that gets to be really fun. But when you sit there and you're like, I have all of these people we need to thank as we like talk about this kind of project, there's a lot of moving parts to like explain it in a concise way. But that's a little bit about what I do. I'm probably more of an art organizer than an artist. I definitely found my community within the arts and found a lot of acceptance and love within critiques and conversations, and find it to be very stimulating. But personally, I'm more fulfilled by helping other people get their work out there than necessarily creating my own and sharing that through exhibitions. And I have been an adjunct professor teaching photography and art for the last couple years. So that's a little bit of the intro. Is there specific questions too that you have for that?
Yeah. For the students joining us, please feel free to throw some questions into the chat bar, and we'll try to get to those as we go along. Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there, Hannah. Let's go on with so your passion is more getting people into art, and you've found these different ways, either through the residency or the mural art program, to really expand that in a different way. How did you get to that? Some of my students are doing projects and they're going through the process of, okay, how do I get from an idea to finding a way, finding ways to implement projects or create avenues for lots of people to get into art. Could you, what was your process maybe through that, and getting there? What were some of the process and the journey and the struggles for you?
So my first kind of step into it was undergrad. Me and my friends, we would take our apartments and host exhibitions. And so we would host exhibitions in these like little tiny living rooms of a 1-bedroom apartment in Pittsburgh and pretend it was a real show, which is totally fine. And that's actually how like the photo successionists started. They rented the apartment across the hall from Steichen, but don't feel like you have to get into the fancy gallery, fancy museum to start doing the thing. So I think being able to shed some of that, it has to be perfect, because if it has to be perfect, it'll never get done. And so that's where I started, was, we're just hanging stuff in living rooms and inviting all of our friends over and having an art opening. And with the Spruce, that started because, so I graduated from my MFA program and I moved back to Western Pennsylvania to teach at Point Park University in Youngstown State. And I was hearing from all my friends who graduated with me that they didn't have enough space in New York City, that there's just not enough space and not enough places to make art, not enough places to put it. They were just kind of, spending all of their time on the metro and at work. And what I was hearing from Indiana was there's way too much space. And that space was, apartments, it was studios, it was an old dentist office. It's like, well, I wonder if the two would go together. Indiana isn't that far from New York. I could pick people up from the airport, from the train station and bring them in. So that's what we did. And we basically came up with an arrangement for places that are still actually listed as for rent. So you can rent them and we'll find a new place. But, our gallery is in an old dentist office. It photographs beautifully, and it works out very well. We have apartments that are, it's a 5-bedroom former student housing apartment. And that works very well too. And the artists get this sense of community and small town feeling that they might never have had. And a lot of them we found have been international artists from India, China, Finland, who are like interested in what a small town America feeling is like. And so they go to Six Hand Bakery, they go to the Artist's Hand, they have a routine and they have people that know them and are excited to see them every day. But they've also been teaching us, the Indianans, about why Indiana's special. And that's something that's been really cool to see. So, for example, Wolfie's, I've never really studied the facade of that building. There's the giant wolf head, there's the specials, there's the, the lights streaming out and the Halloween decorations, but I've never stopped and looked at the stained glass that adorns the front of that building. It's beautiful. And I had an artist from, what was it, LA, that was like, that is just lovely. I was like, I guess you're right. That's beautiful. And that's something that you might not notice without that kind of interaction. And people then, we had then an artist making artwork about the tile work in downtown Indiana. So she was painting these representations of these interiors and these tiles that I recognized but had never really absorbed as a beautiful thing, because you start to take, you kind of take advantage of the things that you know and love as like not special. Like Paris feels special, because it's this iconography. And then when people can come here and show us why it's so important and beautiful and special, there's warm fuzzy feelings all over. And you get to have so many partners in that too. And all of a sudden you're hanging out with the bakers, they're making the final eclair and saying goodbye. We had artists in New York City that came here and were like, I need to go to Six Hand Bakery. I heard at an art opening how good this bread was. And like, just amazing to me. So that's how it started for me. But I mean, there's a lot of vacant space, for example, on Philadelphia Street that would be better with even just a single artwork in it. And it's not that it has to be permanent or perfect. It just has to exist in some way. And that creativity is really fun. It doesn't, you can be in an old dentist's office and it can feel very important and special, and have a big impact. So.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's infectious. I'd say, even though we shouldn't be using that word lightly during a pandemic, but there's good infectious things too. And I certainly think art in other places than what we would typically see them is important. I want to comment on what you pointed out. It's funny, isn't it, that sometimes we need outsiders to come teach us about ourselves. You know,
Mhm.
the thing, like you said, the things we stop noticing,
Mhm.
the the part of art, or the stained glass or things like that. One of the things I kind of talk about in my class is that art as part of human development is, a lot of people don't have freedom to make art, much less say they like this art versus that art. In our country here, much less very poor countries around the world, they don't have that freedom and ability to do that. And just like the appreciation of the time and effort and the thoughtfulness that went into the stained glass building, which I had not, the stained glass on Wolfie's, which I had not noticed at all, but I know I'm going to go look at it now, right, this weekend after we stop talking. So it's just you know the human endeavor, the human creativity that go into the smallest things. At some point when it was being made here in Indiana, that was a really big deal. If it was made 50 or 100 years ago, whatever, that was probably a really big deal, and we've kind of forgotten about that. And that's what art can do, is it can bring back that history. It can bring back an idea of the diversity that we really are. We're not all just the same. There's a lot of stuff going on there. So yeah, thank you for that story. I'll never see Wolfie's the same.
Yeah.
So
There was one artist that did an ode to Jimmy Stewart and just like picked out everything from Jimmy Stewart and like interacted with it in a really fun way that like after your 50th time walking across the street as Jimmy Stewart's voice gently guides you through it, you're like, that's just what happens. And
yeah.
then someone gets there and their first time hearing it, if they're an artist from Taiwan and Jimmy Stewart is now walking them across the street. It's a documentary filmmaker and they're like, what what is happening? And I remember it being a big deal when it was installed, but then like now it's kind of just what happens. And now seeing it as someone just, it's great. It's wonderful.
Is there a couple of other examples of, you know, I would think that maybe the artists that come here, maybe they're finishing up projects or something like that, or is it more likely that they're changed a little bit or moved a little bit by this? And so do they make art that is informed or inspired by this place, and do they do other things to bring the community in?
So it depends on the artist. Some artists are like, I have this deadline, I have this show that I need to get ready for this specific thing, and I'm just churning away 14 hours in the studio. There are some artists that are like, I am here to do plein air painting in White's Woods, and I'm going to wander around White's Woods for the next month. And then there are artists who are coming with a like no plan, just no plan. And so they're going to kind of react to the space. It really depends. And the ways people bring people into the studio or into the work is also entirely dependent on the artist. We ask each artist to do a public inclusion event, whether that's an art opening or a artist talk or a workshop, or more kind of intimate lessons. That's something that we've prioritized as the residency so that they can interact with the community. Largely, that's been artist talks at the Artist Hand, but we also do like open studio nights, and I mean pre-pandemic, of course, is when we're talking about this. But that's been an important part of the interaction of the artist with the community. And sometimes you get artists who like latch on to one of the local artists and they become, bosom buddies, and they hang out all the time and do critiques every day and go out and paint and collaborate in that way. So that can be really fun too. But we have some artists that do, like, we had an artist who was doing Google Maps inspired works, and so she'd been doing like New York City ones because that's where she lives and works, and she lives she works in downtown New York now. And so she's doing that, but she was doing Indiana specific ones. So you came into her studio and you see all these maps of Indiana, and it was just like this like location, but it was airbrushed and all of these different techniques for painting that she was using with it. So sometimes you see literal Indiana, and sometimes you see like their painting of their coffee cup from the artist's hand, and like you can, or you just hear their conversations with the artists on the second floor of the theater building, because that's where they're located, on the third floor. And the second floor is a ton of Indiana artists. So they have interactions with them in that way. And sometimes it includes collaborations and, kind of anytime you have a long coffee talk where you're talking about art, there tends to be ideas sprinkled in there together.
Yeah. Dr. Powers, you had a question about pottery in Smithsburg. Where's that question coming from?
Well, Hannah just sort of answered it in terms of artist communities. I didn't know about the second floor. I know there used to be things there. I didn't know they were still there. But there's like 4 or 5 potters, I think that's what they're called, people who make pottery out in the Smithsburg area. And there's a wood artist out there. I talked to my students about some artists who lived out there, and I just wondered if it's kind of a weird question, because I'm not asking about the incoming artists, but if your organization does anything with that little art community in Smithsburg.
We have in the past. So
Okay.
we've had artists that have come and used the kilns in Smithsburg, and then like
Okay.
worked with those artists. They've made their clay creations and then driven up to Smithsburg. But that's probably as good a time as any to share the creative communities information there. So we recently, along with like 7 partnering organizations, were awarded the Creative Communities Grant from Pennsylvania Council for the Arts, which is a county-wide grant based on how you can build community identity, tourism, the economy, and just community connectedness through art. And it's a great time. And what that means is we're going to be doing more things as a kind of county-wide system, because we have a lot of like Indiana specific, like the Indiana Arts Council, we have the Indiana Art Association, but we kind of want to build into that, like Blairsville and Smithsburg and what's happening in those places, because there's a lot of creativity coming from the whole county. And how can we establish Indiana County as an arts destination and as a place that people, when they're driving from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, they have to stop. They want to go to the Potter Studios. They want to see the murals. They want to be involved in this place. And so that's a big thing with this grant that we're working on, to make sure that we can kind of establish Indiana as that hub and bring more people in, more money in, more economic growth through the arts. So there'll be more Smithsburg Potters involved as we move forward with that 5-year plan.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about what your plans are for the future in a minute. But yeah, this is very exciting. So this for my students who are thinking about their own projects, what I'm asking them to write is not a typical thesis or essay, but kind of a project plan. I have an art idea. I want to implement it here. How do I sell somebody on it? How do I convince someone to award me a grant, or a bank or somebody to put their name or logo on my project? So that it's partly having a creative vision and then laying out some of the things you mentioned, the economic and other impacts of it. So for my students, you may want to look at the Creative Communities Grant, and I'll send you information on that. Could we, one thing I found extremely moving just a few months ago is when the unveiling of the murals occurred. And I would say there was at least 100 people, socially distanced, masked up, coming out together to see this event that had occurred over the past couple weeks, and I really hadn't even heard that it was going on. But a new big thing had just happened in our town with all these beautiful murals and the walking tour, the thanks that went all around from the community helping out, and then the stories behind each mural, and you see the artist telling it. Could you kind of talk about what was that process? How did it get going? How did the community help? And what do you think the successes have been from that?
Yeah, that was it feels like a fluke because at, even like right before they arrived, we were kind of like, is this really going to happen? Um, so interestingly enough, it started with an Instagram DM, as so many good things do. The artists had, so that organization, Dripped on the Road, found us through New York Foundation for the Arts, where we advertise for basically New York City artists to come to Indiana. We found there's a lot of people in New York, not a lot of space. They want to come to Indiana. Perfect. They found us and they do traveling art residencies. So they all pile into an RV and they drive around and they'll go to like 20 different locations and paint 20 murals in 30 days. And that's like, they'll do it for bars, for commissions. And so they were talking about it with me. They were getting a little older and they didn't want to do all of that camping, which they still love camping, but they wanted to see what impacting one community would do as opposed to what impacting dozens of communities would do, because they would just paint and leave. And so we were in Spruce, provided apartments and studios, and we were able to connect them with the community pretty easily, get them walls, and they brought in the artists. And so those artists were, some pretty famous artists all in all. I have slides of them all too.
Oh,
If
yeah.
we
Okay, great.
let
Yeah.
me, but I mean, this works so you can see them. So these murals, they were originally only supposed to paint 9. And what was kind of fun was we didn't know. So it was scheduled for April, which didn't happen because of COVID. But so we rescheduled for October with the kind of like, the artists were doing self-quarantine. They all took tests beforehand so they could hang out together. And we kind of were like, all right, I guess they're coming. And so they came. And we didn't know what their work would be. We didn't know what they would be painting. They just said it wouldn't be offensive, and would have, no foul language or nudity in it. And that if we didn't like it, they could paint over it in whatever color we wanted. So, and that was it. So we did have to confirm. The Indiana Borough has a requirement if you're painting something, if it has a if it has a logo in it or a commercial use like a Coca-Cola sign, then you have to pay a fee. So we didn't have to pay for the permitting. We just had to make sure we weren't closing down any streets, and they were fine. So that's before, and then they arrive and they get started. We connected them with a lift truck, with scaffolding, with all that information. And there was prior to them coming, we did a Kickstarter, and that raised, or GoFundMe, I forget which crowdfunding platform we used, but it ended up raising over $8,000, and that was able to pay for a lot of the materials and the artist fees and the travel. And the artists also got a lot of the paint for half off as part of their sponsorship partnership program. And then they reinvested that with, painting beautiful murals, as well as planting those trees. So those murals, again, were only supposed to be 9. Halfway through, they were like, "Great, it's not going to rain. Do you have any more walls?" And so I like wandered around, and I was like, this one's good. I got the permission from this one, and this one's fine. And here's some other ones." And one day I came back from work and they had just painted a wall. I had no idea they were going to paint it. I told them there was permission for like 10, 15 different walls, and they just started painting them. So right before we had that event of walking through, I made this map the day of. And then when I got there with the maps, I found out they had painted one more that day. So the maps were already useless by the time we went for the walk, but they painted for 14 hours a day. Every minute there was sunlight, they were out painting 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then they would go into the theater building and paint a mural in the stairwell, which was great fun. And they would do yoga and hung out. And it was really sweet to see that community within the artists. But then what Indiana County did was someone contacted me the first day the artists arrived, and they were like, "Hey, how can I help?" And I realized we had already had the GoFundMe that was closed. That was great. But the artists needed food, they needed beer, they needed friendship and community in some sort of way. So I put out a call on Facebook and I was like, hey, if you guys want, this is where they'll be. Feel free to drop off anything. And so they dropped off. I don't think the artist paid for one meal the whole time they were here after that first day. They got so much pizza, so much Thai food. Everyone was like, this is the best Thai restaurant. And they got it every day pretty much. Al Patty's shut down the bar for an hour so they could have a steak dinner without other people there, gave them free alcohol and all sorts of things, and hung out with them during that time. And like people would bring baked goods, they would bring poems that they wrote as a reaction to the murals, they would bring artwork that they made as a response. A lot of the school districts started to do little bonus assignments that if you would go take a picture in front of the mural, that would be a bonus. And then the students would start to talk to the artists, and the artists were so giving of their time and energy and were just so enlivened by this, because normally they paint a wall, they're up on scaffolding for 12 hours and then they leave. And some of those murals, they went up so fast. Like Jimmy Stewart mural at the museum took him 6 hours. 6 hours. That's just 6 hours. And it was incredible. But then you could see the community interacting. It was just really heartwarming at a time when, it's October. We've been all inside and masked up, and no hugs, no kind of community embrace. To see then the community really showing up for these people was, I was very proud to be from Indiana and to have this community supporting it like that. And one of the artists, he's from Argentina, and he said one night after, it was one night he was sharing that he's never had an American hometown, but if he had one, it'd be Indiana. And those artists, I mean, they're from all over the world. They're from Japan, Australia, Argentina, and being here in Indiana felt like a home. And that, I think, is a very special thing that Indiana can do, and that communities can do when you bring them into an arts project like that. So that's part of it. And moving forward, the plan is to then expand and build Indiana's mural artists and grow them together so we can have more collaborations with artists from out of town with local artists. But yeah, that was lovely. That was great. And then we decided like halfway through, oh, we should do a mural walk because there's a lot of murals. So we just like put it out on Facebook. I think we had like 1,000 people register saying they were coming, and I was like, that's, I think, illegal at that point. And so we were really worried we were going to get too many people. So we ended up doing a couple tours and spacing things out, and it was fine. But it was kind of great to have this wonderful cause. That was a pretty tough week for Indiana. And so it was really nice to all be connected in support of art and through this thing that now is part of our identity. What those murals do is, now I'm a photographer, so I think about the photographic life of something. So those murals now, maybe not for you, but they've already been for other people, a backdrop for their graduation, a backdrop for their engagement, their senior pictures. They want, to show off their new boots. You go there and you get that picture, and now it's part of Indiana the same way that the old courthouse is, the downtown, IUP's Oak Grove, those all become aesthetic markers of a shared identity. And you can see that on Instagram already with where people are getting their engagement photos. It was just like, especially October, it was just an influx of, here's a bunch of people in front of the murals sharing this moment. And now like me with my profile picture of having, the murals behind it is going to be this marker that like, I'm from here and I love it here. And that has been a really cool way for Indiana to kind of experience a shared identity at a time when we're like all kind of at home, masked up, and not really able to interact in the same way that we used to be able to. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. I was just writing down. I love this term, aesthetic markers of a shared identity. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's very cool. A couple of other details. You mentioned the artist taking time to be with the kids, and I got to take my boys to a spray painting kind of seminar where the kids got to use spray paint and practice, making their signatures and just, going wild with it. Were all these murals used with spray paint, and there was a certain kind of paint, you mentioned it, the
Mhm.
carbon neutral paint or whatever. Could you explain kind of
Yeah, I'm
those
gonna.
processes of the paint itself?
Okay, so there were two kinds of paint. One was spray paint, but everything was painted with a base of smog armor paint, which uses NASA technology to pull pollutants and germs out of the air. So over time, it shares it cleans the air. So I think it's like within 3 hours, if you paint a room with it, it's cleaned out like 96, 97% of the toxins and bad things in the air. And so one of the conversations we had was, we don't have great air quality. I grew up here, I have asthma, and so many people from my school district had asthma as well. And I think that the impact of the air quality here has some impact on our, residents' health. And they were talking about, if you paint a town with this smog armor paint, would it improve the air quality? You paint the town with this color, with this paint, and with this with these, when put in the trees, can you actually improve the physical well-being of a community? And so that was something that was considered. And they also use spray paint to still get a lot of the like styles that you're used to with murals. The interior mural at the theater building use smog armor paint. So it's cleaning that stairwell as you walk up it, and pulling the pollutants from the air so you're not breathing it in, which is a fascinating technology and pretty amazing that they were able to get that working. So I've linked it there, so I've put it there so you can search more about the actual science behind it, because that is not something I'm fully versed on, but I am. It was smog armor paint, and then the other paint they used was cobra paint for their spray painting. But with what you're talking about at the community garden, we did a workshop for people to learn how to spray paint. So there's an interest in investing in the next generation of mural artists and in just having mural artists in Indiana County in general, and which is, I think, really fun. So they actually bought all their paint from the IUP co-op store because they have non-toxic spray paint. So you can use that inside. You can, breathe it in and it's fine. They bought $7 things of plywood. So you can get this huge plywood thing for $7. Buy some spray paint from the IUP co-op store, and like you're ready to make a mural. And which I thought was a great way to be like, you don't need a wall. You don't need this big project. You don't need grant funding and 600 people's permission to build this. You can just go in your backyard with this $7 thing and some cans of paint and like go for it. Go for it. Make your work big. And I thought that was a really great message to like really, really play with experimentation and to have something that we can do also at home without too much personal interaction and engagement.
Um, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm glad that there was an effort made to do that. That's super interesting. Is, art is also an investment in the community, and it keeps on going. With again, the word infectious. New generations of artists coming out with it. Um, I think you still have a couple of minutes you can give
Yeah.
us. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tell us a little bit. So the way in terms of art and development, it has two roles. One is it's a end in and of itself. It's one of the goals of, society or an economy developing to enjoy art and to create it. That should be a goal of becoming a better society. But it's also a means. A culture of art helps you get there, of cooperation, of creativity, some of the innovation, the things that your art can spur those things so that development occurs better. And you mentioned it, people that are going to be driving from Pittsburgh to Philly, they'll hear about these murals, hopefully, and stop. So that becomes, the murals are beautiful in themselves, but they're also a mechanism to get tourism coming in. So I wanted to ask you, going forward with the Creative Communities grant, what are some of your goals, or what are some of the things that y'all are going to do to make Indiana more known with these murals? Make it known for people in Pittsburgh, so they know about this art community that's coming, that's really growing quickly here, that knows about
Mhm.
these murals, things like that.
Well, I mean, we've already seen it. The tourism has already been happening. That first week, there was a guy that goes around and sees murals, and he has his whole Instagram. It's just he goes to places and sees murals. And he came to Indiana and photographed like 5 of the murals and published that on his Instagram. And that was partially because some of the muralists are pretty well known, somewhat famous in the street art community. And so now it's like, this is the highest concentration of Damian Mitchell murals that you can ever find. You'll find 10 of them in New York, but you're going to spend a whole day getting from them. Whereas here you can get 5 of them and you can see them all in a 15-minute walk and get coffee. So all of a sudden we are now going to be with these, like, what, now we have 17 murals in what, a mile radius. And what that means is you can now come here from Pittsburgh, you can get a public art walking tour, get it all in the time it would take you to see that many murals in, say, Pittsburgh or Philly. And they're high enough quality that they're sometimes even better than what those cities have. And that, I think, is going to be a big driver, especially as with creative communities, to expand that. And you always start to like think about these bigger ideas of if you could have a public art festival where you bring in artists for 2 weeks and they paint all sorts of things. And then what does it look like if you have kind of conferences and workshops and ways that people can engage with that? And you're bringing in 14 murals every year. What does that look like at the end of 5 years? When you have maybe 75 murals in Indiana County, all of a sudden you're like the highest concentration of murals in the United States, in Pennsylvania. And now it's like great murals. It's murals by kids. It's murals by people who are just starting out. And now it becomes almost that thing of like, that town in Greece where every house is painted white with the blue roofs. And then Indiana maybe becomes the town where every house has a mural, and who knows what happens after 5 years of this program. I mean, we've seen 1 year and we already have seen a new mural happen on Philadelphia Street within 4 months, 2 months, with the Voodoo Brewing. So all of a sudden it might be that thing where businesses now have to invest in making a mural to help Indiana become that place. And so it's tough to see where it goes and where it could go. But I mean, right now we're just at the start of what it could be. And we were able to do this during a pandemic where everything was shut down, where economy was, tanked. And here we are talking about these kind of big ideas and what could be next after having done 14 murals in 14 days. And I think what it could mean for Indiana, we've kind of struggled with an identity. So we were working on our grant application, and the narrative for the identity, we were kind of like, we've been a coal town, kind of. We've been a university town, kind of. We've been a lot of different things, but we haven't really come together in a shared vision of what's next. We have we know what was in the past, but we're not sure that's going to work in the future. How can we identify ourselves, and what is our plan moving forward? How are we going to be? What is Indiana's thing? Is it covered bridges? Is it Christmas tree farms? Is it the university? Is it the coal mines? Where are we sitting within the world, and how can we use that to make a better future? And I personally think that art is the center of that. Art can encompass all of those things, because art can be it can be coal miners on the back of the theater building. It can be a university collaborative project. It can be Christmas trees on the side of Bob Subs. It can share our history and then also be our future. So, and that's where I think that things should go. And with this grant, I think that now we have a lot of the funding and support, and then we can bring in more partners and more people and really accelerate that to the point where we are, kind of lousy with murals. Which is kind of what I'm hoping, and to expand into public art and to other mediums, because visual art is, I think, the most consistent form. So you put the mural up, but then maybe those murals become the backdrop to a music festival or a theater festival. Maybe you put artwork along the Hoodlebug Trail, and then those are markers for where you'll hear monologues when you go on a walking tour through the Hoodlebug Trail. So once you start to get these things rolling, you can start to get partners in that then are going to help all of those things happen and bring the community together, which is kind of all we want now, is that like big community hug, because we've missed it. And I think that art can do that and do that long term.
One, you know what I think goes with murals really good is big metal sculptures. And when you drive into Indiana from the south, a lot of what people remember are big piles of metal just sitting there. Wouldn't it be nice if all those piles of metals were beautiful sculptures? I want one in the front of I want my house to be mural colored and with a big sculpture in my house. And that's bringing heritage into the future, you know, our role in steel and railroads and things like that. So maybe that's another one we can make happen.
Absolutely.
Two questions. You know, your experience with bringing in artists have probably maybe felt this, the changing environment, and they feel maybe, you know, their creativity is lacking, or they may feel uninspired or lonely. I know lots of students are going through that now, right? They're at home around their families. They're not around the community that they were hoping to for college, where a lot of ideas, you know, just like the artists talking, you know, students talking with their friends, that's the generation of ideas. So students are worrying, you know, how might you encourage them, or what might you recommend to help them rediscover passion, and just dealing with the hard feelings being disconnected with IUP and friends?
Yeah, well, I just want to say I'm sorry. That absolutely sucks. And I'm sorry you have to go through it. But you are, you know, it's that adversity thing. You got this. And, you know, I'm there too. We're, you know, we're disconnected, and we're a very kind of, I think art can be a very visual, physical thing where you're around it and you want that community, you want that feedback, you want to like look at a painting and be like, oh my gosh, this reminds me, I can do that color palette here. And that can still happen. So what we did with the Spruce was me and Ariana, who's my partner in the Spruce. We've been working together on it now for the whole time. We decided to reach out to the Spruce former artists in residence and to the community and see if there was interest in doing kind of weekly critiques, or one thing that I do with my friends is we do a creative night where we just put our phones up, or our Facebook Messenger, or FaceTime, whatever system you're using, Zoom, and you don't really interact that much. You like say hi and check in, but then you like turn on, you know, if you're watching TV or listening to a podcast, and you just start making art. And the whole time your expectation is you're not scrolling on Instagram or going into any sort of homework or anything like that. You're just going to make something. And it's going to be 2 hours, and you're just going to make something. It might be bad. No one has to know. But you get to kind of disconnect from some of the doom scrolling that you might be doing and just make work. And you get to kind of be with your friends, which is nice to like look up and like see your friend like working on their wood block carving or something. And to have that interaction is kind of wonderful in a parallel play kind of way. If you're talking about childhood development, I like to do a lot of parallel play because I'm not naturally a very social person, but I like to be with people. So for me, that works really well to make work while also being with someone without having kind of the demands of a how's your life going? And then what also happens with that conversation now is the feedback is generally like, it's really hard now. And that can be hard to absorb after you've been absorbing months and months of it's really hard, and it's getting worse. So if you're just like, hey, what are you working on today? We're going to make some art together. Might be bad, that's okay. And if you have one friend for that, that's great. If you don't have one, that's okay too. You can live stream it on Facebook or Instagram and just like it doesn't have to be on the artwork to see how good of the artwork is. It could just be you making the brush strokes, and in your pajamas, it doesn't matter. And I think that's kind of fun. So we've been doing now Sunday critiques, which we get together, and the first 15 minutes, someone does a little research presentation. So depending on what their research is, they like maybe share their favorite art theorist, or the new crazy thing in the art world, or talk about the banana taped to the wall, and do a research presentation on that. And then we do a little discussion. And then, excuse me, after that, we do a critique of each other's work and what we've done over the week. So, and it's just trying to find that sort of community, and you have other people here. So it could be that like, oh, someone's going to make it for me and then I'll join it. But you could also make it yourselves, make a Facebook group of all of the IUP art students and be like, hey, does anyone want to do Zoom artwork on Thursdays? That's when I'm going to do it. And I'd love for people to join. I know it sounds really vulnerable and scary, but I guarantee you there's like 40 other people on this call that are feeling that exact same way. They're lonely and burnt out and tired of Zoom. But if you like get that up and do some creativity, it can be really fun and a great way to connect with people without the pressures of like, how am I going to converse with them? You're just making art together nearby. That's it. It doesn't have to be high intensity. So I think that's what I've been doing to kind of reconnect with the creative side of life. So are there online communities for young artists or just artists in general? I mean, I've mostly made the communities I've worked with and built. I've done online communities for artists in general. When I was in grad school, we did a Facebook group where we would be like, oh, I'm going to this art opening tonight if anyone wants to join me, or oh, I'm working on this. Does anyone have any information about this artist? Or now that we're teaching in colleges, it'll be like, oh, I'm doing a presentation on this specific artistic moment. Does anyone have any other artists I should add to this? And that can be a great resource. But I think that a lot of it is you can build your own community. You can be the person that starts the Facebook group and starts the conversation and bring people together. It can be very, very rewarding. So I would recommend that, of where's that IUP art community, and if it's not where you want it to be, if it's only on Zoom at 11 a.m. on Thursdays, how can you make it into what you want it to be? There's a lot of people that are looking for that connection as well. So
I think you've given a good idea for one of my students to do their community art project with. So that's unfair, whoever goes with that, but please do. So,
well, and you'll find sometimes many people do many projects that are very similar, and you can collaborate on things, maybe not for your final project, but in the real world, you can.
Yes.
So,
yes. We're running out of time here, so I'll leave you with one last thing. And it's, again, the underlying, I think you have a lot more insight than certainly I do on this, because I've come into art late in life. But the question that this is, we're in the honors college here, that this course is, and the underlying question that things are centered around is, how do we understand art and what do we do about it? And I think, this whole conversation has been about that. But is there a ribbon that you could tie on this conversation in that overall context that the students can take away?
Of sure, yeah. I think you don't have to understand art to be connected to it, or connected to other people. So you can be connected in your not understanding of art, and that's fine too. And that's probably going to be something of the murals, of like, people will unite around loving them, and they might unite around hating them. And I think that maybe is something that might happen, of like, now maybe you'll go to your friends and be like, what's your favorite one? And that's a conversation. And I think art can do a really good job of bringing more people into the conversation. So like for the Creative Communities grant, we have like 7 partners, we had 11 letters of support. So it's one of the few things that I feel like you can bring in. We have government agencies working with school districts, working with arts organizations, working with private businesses, everything from how do we make this sewer drain prettier to how do we make the side of this building or this garage prettier. And why do you do that? Why do you do that? Because it starts to be the marker of your identity, of the community, of your support network, of vibrancy. And art can be really flexible when you're putting it in places. So like the Spruce, we can be in an old dentist's office that's still available for rent, and we can move to a new location at kind of the blink of a hat, a drop of a hat in a blink. And you can put art in a vacant storefront that maybe you couldn't do with, like, if you were trying to sell, clothes. But you can put art in a window, and it can be better for everyone as they walk through the street. I mean, you see that Chuck Olson has his work right now in an old bank that hasn't been rented in now years, but is now providing this kind of visual sense that we're alive and we're creating, we're working on something, and it's this hope for the future. And often artists are the first ones that dive into an economic area because studios are really cheap and artists don't really care. Like, I know so many artists that have studios that don't have heat or internet, but they're like in there with their mittens painting because they're creative people and they can see the beauty in working, say, in an old Pfizer facility. There's all sorts of ways that you can be inspired by anything from a basement to an ugly place. And that, I think, is the real beauty of art and its economic drive, is it can see the beauty in places that are perhaps abandoned or underutilized and bring the community together once they see perhaps some of that vision and that imagination that the artists have, that perhaps your average everyday business person doesn't see. They see the liability of the space, whereas artists can see the possibilities. So that would be kind of my wrap up, tie a bow around it. There you go.
Yeah.
And you're also all welcome to contact me or email or whatever if you have any other questions or want to connect about things.
Well, thank you very much. And last, if you could, is there an online map and description of these murals? So if someone could only visit them interactively, virtually, is that available?
Yes, I can send the map's a PDF, so I'll send that to you.
Okay, and I can
But we
share with
have
everybody.
great, we have the murals online, and something that's happening with the murals is there's going to be a documentary about 20 minutes long, talking about some of the artworks and the artists who made them, because we had a documentary filmmaker here capturing the whole experience, and they really want to do some sort of premiere. So whether that's Zoom or Facebook or the Jimmy Stewart Museum over a weekend or something, we're not quite sure the safest way to do it, but we're hoping to bring it as this kind of like moment where we can all get back together and be like, what a good job, everybody. Give everyone this kind of the community hug we're all looking for. So that should be released in the next month or so. So I'll be sure to send you that link so you can kind of get the feeling of what that was like too. So you can see more of them. They could not do all 14 of the murals. It's mostly focused on 4 to 6 of the murals. So
Okay.
because it would have been too many. And it was one documentary filmmaker, which when it was 14 murals going up in 14 days, he was a little overwhelmed.
I bet.
Oh, and they did do a 15th one at Horseman Elementary, but you can't get in to see that. So that was in April.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, again, thank you
So yeah,
so
I'll
much.
send.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. I'm looking forward to what you have in store for the community going forward. Yeah, everybody give a virtual applause to Hannah Harley.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and good luck, everybody, in creating your communities and helping out this one.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you
Thanks,
everyone
everyone.
else for joining me today. If you have any questions, or I'll be sharing links and stuff like that, and we'll have this recording up so we can share it with others. Thanks everybody. I hope that you enjoyed our little lecture here, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Thank you.